Alright, so welcome back to Everdell, how to play. Alright, so I was just about to go over the cards and what the 5 different card types are. So the Wanderer here is part of the 10 Traveler cards. Okay, so that's one of them. The Farm here is considered a grain production card. And if you look at the plant from the first video when I was showing you the tree, when you play this card here, you'll get the benefit. So when you add the farm to your town or city, you will get this benefit, which is gain 1 berry. That's how you activate. That's one of the ways you activate this card. Another common way is when you prepare for the next season. So when you're in winter and prepare for spring, you get to activate all of your green production cards. So this would include the farm, obviously. And then when you prepare for season for autumn, you also get to activate all of the green production cards. Once again. So that's really cool. And during summer, so when you prepare for summer, the difference in that is then you would get to take 2 cards from the meadow and put them into your hand. So like I could take these 2, and then 2 more would take their place from the deck back to the middle. But that's how that works. Anyways, so that's how you activate all the green production cards. Now, the Tan Traveler is a one-time activation. So the time you play it is the only time you're going to get to activate this ability. So once you add the Wanderer to your city, for instance, you get to draw 3 cards, but it's a one-time use. You'll never get to draw the 3 cards again with this particular card here, unless you get another Wanderer and put it into your town. Now, there is a limit to how many critters and construction you can have in your town. You can only have a maximum of 15 cards in your town. That includes critters, that includes construction. So it's not 15 critters and 15 construction. It's 15 total. So it's up to you what you're going to put into your town, and sometimes it can be very hard to remove certain critters or construction from your town. So think carefully about what your town is going to have. Is your town going to have a lot of farms? Is your town going to have the cemetery? Is your town going to have a post office? Is your town going to have a university? Is your town going to have a palace or a dungeon? And then as far as the critters are concerned, is your town going to have an architect? Is your town going to have a miner mole, for instance? Or a mine, for that matter, for construction? So there's a lot of different things that you have to choose from, and there is no way you can have them all in your town. You cannot have one of each of the critters and one of each of the construction. There's just too many. Too many that you can have. So you have to kind of pick and choose what you're going to have in your town. And sometimes you don't have the option. Sometimes maybe perhaps you want to have a courthouse and a judge in your town, but the cards never show up. Or until they do show up, but they show up at the end of the game, and your town is already full. So that can happen too. So you also not only do have a choice of what you're going to put in your town, sometimes you only have a choice of what's available at the time. So that's another thing to note. And so this game can be kind of random sometimes of when certain cards show up, or it seems like some cards show up more than others. Like, I remember the first time I played this game, I really wanted to get the Undertaker, but it didn't show up until the very end of the game, and I was unable to get the Undertaker because it showed up at the very end and my town was already full. So that is something to note. Now, another thing that's really cool is when you play a card from your hand or the meadow, you do have to pay a certain cost of resources to build that building. And then as far as critters are concerned, well, they need to eat, right? So in order to bring a critter into your town, you have to basically sort of bribe him / feed him some berries to get him to come to your town. And so that's how the resources work. And so, like, for instance, if you were going to build to this building here called a lookout, it would cost you a twig, a resin, and a pebble to build. But then once you paid the resources, you get to put it into your town. And then you'll notice that this particular card here has a little thing in the corner of it, which says Wanderer, which means if you have this building in your town and a Wanderer comes along, maybe in the meadow or in your hand later on, you can play it as a separate action and play it for free. Well, that's really cool, right? You get the Lookout, and then you get the Wanderer for free. Otherwise, you'd have to pay 2 berries. But you get to play him for free if you have the Lookout. And so a lot of these buildings have critters that go with them. So that's something to note. So maybe you'll want to build a building before you add a critter to your town. So that's really something to note. But here's the thing. You can only do this once per building. So even though there's more than one Wanderer to choose from, you're only going to be able to do this once with this particular building. And so as an idea, you'll have these little these occupied tokens here. That's what they're called. And when you decide to play, like for instance with the Lookout, a Wanderer for free because you have the Lookout, you'll put one of these occupied tokens on this location here, indicating that you've already done that, as a reminder that you can't do that again with this card, unless you get another Lookout building. Then, of course, you could do it, obviously. Now, with that said, the reason why it's another good thing to note is sometimes you'll lose cards in your town. So maybe your the building will disappear later, or maybe the Wanderer will disappear later. You don't know. And so with that said, you'll want to always have that occupied token around to indicate that that still happened, so you don't lose track. So, anyways, that's how that all works, and that's really cool that if you want to, get a lot of critters in your town and a lot of buildings in your town, it's cheaper to try to get pairs if you can. But sometimes pairs don't always work. Like I said, the cemetery showed up quite a bit, and it pairs with the Undertaker, but I couldn't get the Undertaker to show up. So I never got to play it for free, which was kind of a drag. So that happens. But at the same time, in that same game, I played the Courthouse, and it's paired with the Judge here, and so I got to play the Judge for free, which was really cool. So I had the Courthouse and the Judge, and that's really cool. Now, we already went over Green Production and 10 Traveler cards, but another one of the cards are these, the Blue Governance cards. Now, these are abilities that activate when a certain condition happens. So with the Judge, for instance, when you play a critter or construction, you may replace one resource with another resource. And that little thing there next to the 1 indicates a bunch of different resources. So it can be any resource with any other resource. A lot of times you'll notice that you'll have a lot of one particular resource, but a building requires a resource you don't have. Maybe a pebble. Maybe it requires 1 pebble, but maybe you just have twigs and resin and you don't have a pebble. Well, if you had the Judge in your town, you could exchange the pebble for one of the other resources you have, like a twig, for instance. So that's how that would work. And you could do this whenever you played a critter or a construction card in your town. So that's really powerful. Excuse me. Anyways, so with that said, there's a lot of really cool cards out there, and that's why I'm going to have a separate video explaining every single card in detail. And I'll probably do the building, and I'll probably do the critter right after the building, just because they all work well together. It doesn't always happen that you always get to do that, but you should be able to at least be able to do it a couple of times throughout the game. At least a couple, if not more. So that's really cool, though. So that's another one of the cards that you can get. Now, like I said, there is still 2 more types of cards. And the cemetery here is a red destination card, which makes sense because this is a destination spot where you can place a worker. And if you place a worker down on this cemetery, it'll activate a certain ability. And there are other types of, obviously, red destination cards out there that do a whole bunch of different things. And so that's when they would activate. The ability would only activate with red destination cards when a worker was placed on it. But here's the cool thing. If, for instance, you were the player who had, you were the turtle player, okay? So you have the cemetery in your town, and you have the turtles. Another player, like, the red squirrels, they could place a worker down in your cemetery, and that's perfectly allowed. But the cool thing is, if they were to do that, you do get some points if they do it. So, and those points are victory points, by the way. So that's something to note. So for players who want to do that, they are going to be helping out their opponent a little bit as well. So that's kind of interesting. I really like that concept a lot. So that's another one of the types of cards that you can have. Now the last one is the purple prosperity cards. Now these basically work with giving you tons of extra victory points, usually. So it says here you'll get 1 point for each of your unused resin and pebbles to a maximum of 6. So at the end of the game, if you have the architect in your town, you're going to get a certain amount of victory points up to the maximum of 6 extra for each unused resin and pebble in your town. So if you had like 4 pebbles and 2 resin in your town, that would give you 6 points at the end of the game if you still had those resources that you weren't able to use. So getting an architect is really useful if you don't manage to use up all of your resources at the end of the game. Of course, it only works with resin and pebbles. So that means berries and twigs are out. It doesn't work with that. Plus, it's worth 2 points at the end of the game anyway. So even if you don't have a lot of resources left over, pebbles and resin, you're still going to get some points for having the architect in your town. But that's how the purple prosperity cards work. They give you extra victory points at the end of the game. And obviously the green ones, they activate when you play them and when 2 different seasons, you're preparing for 2 different seasons, spring and autumn. The blues will activate every time a certain condition is met. This one obviously works with critters and construction. And there's a lot of other types of blue governance cards out there that will work with critters and construction. The tan travelers are a one-time ability. When you play them, you get to activate them. And as far as the red destination cards are concerned, you will get to activate their abilities if a worker is placed there. And it's your worker, of course. So that's how that works. That's how all the cards function as how you get to activate abilities and all that. So that's obviously the second normal action that you can do on your turn besides placing a worker down and getting resources or doing a bunch of other different things. Like at the end of the game during autumn, you can place a worker here and then you must discard cards equal to the amount of points you're going to put down. So if you put a worker down on 5, you would have to discard 5 cards in order to get 5 points and in order to get the worker there. So that's something to note. You could also place a worker here, and you may discard any amount of cards from your hand, and then for every 2 you discard, you gain 1 resource of your choice. So that's how that would work as well. And those are the 2 additional areas that you could have workers placed. But there are other areas, and we'll go over those in a separate video where you could place workers. Now, there's one last action to consider, the prepare for the next season. For prepare for the next season, you will do what the season indicates. You will, if it's spring, for instance, you'll get to activate all your green governance cards. Then you'll get all your workers back. So all your workers, once they're placed at a spot, they will stay there until either the end of the game. For this location, it's end of game. But for everywhere else, like here and all of these resources up here, all your workers will come back to you, or if they're even on your cemetery for that matter, they'll all come back to you, and then you'll get an additional worker, or maybe more, depending on what season it is. So you'll have more workers for the next season, and that's how you prepare for the next season. And maybe some additional abilities with the farm, for instance, or the mine, for instance, that you could possibly do on your turn. And those are the 3 basic actions of the game. And that's how it works. And then at the end of the game, you just add up all of the victory points. Cards have victory points on them as well. So you'll add those. You might add some victory points here. You might get one of these tokens if you acquire a certain amount of cards. Like this one is the Monument, City Monument. If you have 3 blue governance cards in your town and you place a worker here, you can acquire this for 3 extra points at the end of the game. So that's something to note. And there are a few other tokens you could get if you could obviously acquire a certain amount of certain cards. Like, for instance, the Red Destination, Green Production, or the Tan Traveler. It's just those 4 that can acquire these particular tokens. And that's basically how you play the game. Everybody will take an action, and whatever action that may be, and then one action at a time is what you'll take. Another player will play their turn, they'll take their action, they will get their abilities taken care of, whatever they're supposed to do. And it will continue until nobody is playing, until everyone has completed all of their seasons, then they have no more actions they want to take or can take. And then the game will end, and you will add up all your victory points. And that's basically how this game works. So let's go over cards in the next videos and show you what each card does as we go. Okay, we'll go over everything. There's actually 3 different types of cards that we will go over. 3 different. Critters and Construction make up 1. Then we have the Forest cards that would go here. And then we even have special event cards that go on the 2nd level of the Ever Tree. Okay? See you guys in the next videos. Videos, for sure.